Hey guys, and welcome to another video, taking a break from the raiding content to talk a little bit about the story. So there's going to be heavy spoilers here, as the title obviously let you know, and what I want to discuss today is where Heart of Thorns will go in the future. Namely, I'm looking at Living World Season 3, Living World Season 4, and eventually perhaps how they'll segue onto the next expansion. So I've talked at length about how Heart of Thorns was really a very narrow expansion, and what this kind of has meant for future story speculation is most of the stuff you've seen me talk about before Heart of Thorns came out is still perfectly valid and possible and true, because none of those plot lines were actually touched in any way. Maybe ever so slightly hinted at or referenced maybe a single one of those characters or something, but in the end they weren't used. However, having said that, I do believe that Heart of Thorns does set up some pretty clear places we'll go in the very immediate future. Definitely Living World Season 3, and hopefully beyond, and, you know, some of these more less grounded theories. So, first of all, I think that is incredibly obvious and is going to take a fair amount of our time is Rata Novus. I do believe that Living World Season 3 is going to bring us back to Rata Novus. For what it's worth, I believe that Living World Season 3 isn't going to take place entirely on the new maps, even though it's confirmed you need to actually own the expansion or just the game in general to be able to play it. And why do I say Rata Novus? Well, because that's where Timey stayed. Timey staying in Rata Novus was kind of an obvious move for the devs. They have a child character who has obvious plot armor, and also, frankly, I think undervalues the epicness of an Elder Dragon battle if you write a story that a tiny little kid can go in and basically defeat an Elder Dragon. So she stays behind, and that makes sense, but this isn't just an excuse to get her out of the picture. This also allows her to have story, have a few developments, have some news for us. I would bet my bottom dollar that Season 3 begins with a mail from Timey saying, "Hey, boss, come check me out in Rata Novus, I've learned some stuff." So I do definitely think we'll be returning there, but what kind of stuff could she in theory learn? Well, this is where things can get perhaps a little bit interesting. First of all, you do have the Rata Novans themselves. Those of you who played the expansion and didn't pay too much attention might just think that the Rata Novans, the people of this underground city founded by Zin, were just wiped out by the Chuck, and now it's dead and they're all gone. That's not necessarily true. A lot of them were escaping. They had an Asura gate through which they escaped. Now, the technology behind their Asura gate wasn't necessarily linked to any of our ones, so I don't know whether this would have gone to a regular place up on the surface, or perhaps to another place that Zin perhaps had set up, even still deeper underground. Actually, one of the things I think the expansion did best was kind of story-wise explain that we were so deep underground of Rata Novus that even Morgemoth's influence was beginning to lose its effect on the Sylvari that were there. And I like the idea of perhaps another place. But also, I would point your attention to an Asura gate that was found in the Brisbane Wildlands at the Bandit Fort. Now, I really can't think of any super logical speculation as to what this surrogate's got to do, but this was a long-standing mystery set up from Season 2 of The Living World, where the bandits who eventually retreated from Morgemoth and ultimately ended up where the raiders, these bandits had an Asura gate at their fort, and when you go there after they'd left, there is a member, I believe, of the Priory studying it saying, "Hey, this is a really weird gate. It seems to go to nothingness. It goes to something completely uncharted." And that's pretty interesting. Maybe it's got something to do with Rata Novus, who knows. There is, of course, more likely, beyond all of that, just the fact that Timey will tell us about some Elder Dragon weakness. Of course, when we originally went to Rata Novus, we found out that they had been studying the Elder Dragons, but nothing came of this whatsoever. It was a huge problem with the expansion, in my opinion, in terms of pacing and just wasted time, but maybe this was always meant to be a bit of a setup for Season 3, where Timey, who was stuck about, has now found some big revelation about a future Elder Dragon, and that could be our segue into future stories. One thing I'm a little concerned about with Season 3 is that, like predictable clockwork, we're just gonna get a bunch of new story thrown at us that makes another Elder Dragon relevant. ArenaNet is still in a problem where they have these supposedly menacing creatures, but they're basically inactive and not in our daily lives. So there's a very good chance that Season 3 is gonna have either a big catastrophe of an Elder Dragon, like, I don't know, the Lion's Arch concept art with a deep sea dragon, or it's us that's going to find the crosshair and where we want to put it based on something we learn in Rata Novus, perhaps even Prime Order, since, you know, there was a really cool cool line that the Ratanovans really hated Primordus. Aside from this as well, I do think that this is an opportunity for the devs to talk more about the Chuck here, and specifically this idea of utilizing the Chuck against not just Morgemoth, as we sort of saw in the expansion, but to what extent it was super effective. It wasn't very good because of the way they split open world and story, but using the Chuck even against other Elder Dragons and going into more detail about what extent we can actually manipulate these creatures. I don't think we've seen the Chuck come into the story and then just disappear. The Chuck themselves are in a really interesting place. They are like draconic creatures. They eat magic and feed on leyline energy. That's really important and really unique to them without actually having an Elder Dragon Master. It's curious stuff. Lastly, with Timey and Ratanovus, I will mention is the weird uncategorized fractal theory stuff. So, this deserves its own video, and I'll be very brief, but you guys may remember the Fractal, the Harpy Fractal, as many of us know it, where you're running around in some weird, crazy version, it would seem, of Ratasum, but Dessa, the woman who's leading you through the Fractals, gets very distressed upon seeing it, and has to run off to deal with something, so it would seem. This has always been a fractal that captured people's imagination, to the point where the devs actually responded about it on the forums. And what was said at this time was that the uncategorized fractal is not representing a potential future of Ratasum. In fact, it was confirmed that not a single fractal has anything to do with the future at all. And if you read the comment, it basically sounds like it's a different Asuran city. And when we look at the Tangled Depths map, you can see what would appear to be something like the uncategorized fractals, combined with the fact that there was a dialogue update in the uncategorized fractal at the release of Heart of Thorns, seemingly for no reason, would suggest maybe there's a little something more going on there, and we may get a payoff on that story. Moving on, away from Timey and Ratanovus, I think Glint's legacy is going to be a massive part of the upcoming seasons. I think we'll probably get 2 before the next expansion, for what it's worth. And Glint's legacy means a lot more than the egg, guys. So yes, the egg is going to be a big story. Heart of Thorns had no epilogue. It had no ending. It just finished with a cutscene of what? Morgemoth's magic going into the egg. There are a lot of theories in the community that this magic is somehow evil and will corrupt the egg. I don't really know why that is such widespread speculation. Energy is energy, in my opinion. I think what we're seeing with Morgemoth dying and leaking his magic elsewhere is pretty much the same scenario as when we saw Abaddon be destroyed and Cormyr take the magic. I believe that this is just fueling various things. The final cutscene, I believe, also kind of hints at the idea of that magic going elsewhere, not just to the egg. And this is probably ArenaNet's easy key into, oh, the other Elder Dragons are suddenly super active. Hopefully more than one, because that way they can deal with more than one going at each other at the same time and maybe kill 2 at the same moment. But the egg definitely, I think, will grow. I think it will grow fast. I think that ArenaNet can very quickly and easily drop a story in that says, oh, because of this crazy infusion from Morgemoth, the egg's growing really quickly. Look, it's already hatched. We've got a baby dragon here. We've got like our Gleam 2.0. And what's really cool about this, and I think they'll want to do, is the idea of an actual creature hatching and growing and becoming an adult over the course of a lot of real-world time, like over a span of 2 years in the real world, is actually a really cool thing that they can only do by utilizing the concept of living world. And, you know, this could be something that they really try and hammer and try and do really well. Either that, or we'll just suddenly see a big-ass dragon one day in Tyria, and it's basically done. So I do think we're going to see a lot more with the egg. But the egg isn't all of Glint's legacy. If you spend any time in Tyria talking to other members of the Exalted, you'll see that they're very frank about the fact that there is more to Glint's legacy. It's just, it's not all been revealed. Glint set many plans in motion, not just the Exalted, not just the various places that the Exalted built and this idea of the egg, but probably other things in other areas of the world too, and maybe Ogden is just the guy we need to go to learn a little bit more about that. Next is a tricky topic. I don't know whether I want to say yes or no on this being addressed, and I'll explain why, but I do want to discuss the idea of Rytlock in the Mists. Many of us bought the expansion on the hopes that there'd be a huge section of Rytlock in the Mists in just the base game, but we never got that. So is it then fair to say that it will come in the living world? That the devs are throughout the personal story hinting about Rytlock in the Mists and these voices in his head, or him getting used to magic and mysteriously seeming to know where members of Destiny's Edge are. they get us curious about it, and then the payoff is in the living world, and that encourages people to log in throughout living world? Or are they saving it for an even slower burner? What they've actually done is make Ritlock a very storied and mysterious character. A lot of the circumstance of his true warband is shrouded in mystery. Obviously, his sword Sahothin and his acquisition of it is shrouded in mystery. This was even being talked about right up until Season 2 of the Living World before we saw him go into the mists. And now, of course, we've got all this stuff in the mists too. So, are they going to pay that off in the living world, or are they going to do another race-centric expansion and leave these stories until we get the char-based one, and then all of the Ritlock stuff truly unfolds? I can't tell, but I don't think it's totally dead in the water. Next are some other very obvious things that we may even see in the first update, along with perhaps some timey stuff. This would be the fate of the Pale Tree and the future of the Sylvari. Again, the Season 3 of the Living World is going to have to deal with some of the things that were missing from the ending of Heart of Thorns. And here's the situation we're in. We have an entire race of Sylvari who are still there, and there was a little bit of dialogue about that in the personal story. But they now have to deal with the fact that this Morgemoth threat is gone, but their Pale Tree is still mortally wounded. They're at least going to have to take us back to the Grove to see the culture of the Sylvari there, see what they're talking about, get a little bit of involvement from the rest of the damn Sylvari instead of just these couple of characters we see as we trek through the jungle, as well as either restore the Pale Tree to her former self, as I think they'll probably do. They'll say, oh, Morgemoth is gone, so I'm healing. Or, you know, do something drastic to her, and maybe that can drive some of the plot. But there'll be definitely something in the Pale Tree and the Grove in general. Not just this, but on the topic of the Sylvari, we also have a lot of loose ends in the Nightmare Court. So, Foulane is defeated, but the Nightmare Court's desire to be free is still, in theory, at odds with the Pale Tree and the Dream. There was also in Dragonstand, very strangely thrown in, an allied Nightmare Courtier Duchess, who, of course, could be the replacement for Foulane. And they may do some storyline there. ArenaNet, again, actually have an opportunity to finish the Nightmare Court arc entirely, which would make the Sylvari quite dull for the future. You know, like their main thing is over, and now what kind of conflicts drive them if we get rid of the Nightmare Court too? But there is cause to say, all right, look, you know, the Pale Tree was only being so dictatorial about what Sylvari did because she didn't want any of the Sylvari to tap into Morgemoth and unhinge everything. But now the Morgemoth's gone, don't worry, you're free to do whatever you like, and then maybe the Nightmare Court aren't so angry. They could, in theory, do that. But then, in terms of the mechanics of the game, what do they do with all the Nightmare Court that are randomly roaming around the countrysides? It's a bit of a challenge for them, and we'll see how they continue to make the Sylvari interesting going forward. Next on the list, that I'm scared to mention, but deserves mentioning, poor Malik. I remember you, dudes. I remember that you left and that you were this really cool setup and that you said that you were going to find an army from another Pale Tree. Talking about how they can make the Sylvari interesting in the future is this idea of other Sylvari from other trees finding their identity and any conflicts or weird things to do with that, particularly if there was something going on in the Echovaled Forest. This is a good segue one day to Cantha. But more importantly, maybe Malik never appeared in the expansion because they knew this was one of the only ways they could make the Sylvari super cool and have really relevant storylines going forward. Maybe Malik's tree is still out there. Maybe his army is still there. Continuing on with fates, we have the fate of Logan/Zodja. So, of course, in the story, one of these characters seemed to be seriously wounded. Did they die? Are they going to be out of action for a long time? I think that we're going to see a long recovery phase for that character, and maybe, depending on what you chose in the expansion, some subtle branches in Season 3, but I think eventually it will be resolved that they should get nursed back up to health. But there's the question of just Destiny's Edge in general. Of course, they've lost their leader. They've lost Air. And there's a lot of comments in the expansion that really make it sound like they want Destiny's Edge 2.0 to usurp the original Destiny's Edge. We got comments like Ritlock saying, oh, this group is better than we ever were. Like, okay, so what are they going to do with the Destiny's Edge characters? I actually like the idea of them striking out on their own and doing their own specific stuff, and maybe some of them can pair up. I love the buddy-buddy stuff between Logan and Ritlock, I really do, but maybe we don't need, like, this hard and fast adventuring guild, one of each race, that has to do stuff together all the time. Then, of course, we can talk about Air, and perhaps some kind of memorial for her in Holbrack would be just. I mean, Christ, if we got one for Apatia in the personal story, surely we can get something for Air. Some word of her death reaching Newt Whitebeard, and perhaps this then rolls into some future events. Maybe they can reuse Kragstead with Bram, who goes home to grieve, or meet what he knows of as his family up there, and now he's bald and he kind of explains things. Maybe we get some real story about elite specializations now, of him actually picking up the bow and practicing with it, since we never got it with either Marjorie or Bram. They should do something with that. Otherwise, the death of Air is going to be even more insulting, particularly to the Norn characters, than it already was. Let's talk about Lion's Arch. So, there was a lot of stuff that seemed like it could happen at Lion's Arch, but ArenaNet opted to tell the story entirely in the jungle and not use any other setting. So, Lion's Arch didn't have anything going on. We do, of course, have some prominent characters there. We've got Evan, we've got Ellen, we've got Captain Magnus, we've got a few cool ones. But specifically, if you guys remember, not even in Living World, but just after the Lion's Arch update, ArenaNet started doing some funny things, specifically with the new Black Lion Trading Company vaults. There's a mysterious Asura gate beneath the vaults and a chamber that we haven't been able to go to just yet. And then there were the Black Lion chests running around rampant. Was this just a little hint, like a cheeky little fun update they wanted to throw in before they made the chests available on the gem store? Was it purely a marketing stunt and has nothing to do with the story? Or does the existence of these chests, as well as the mini pet rocks from a while back, maybe hint at some storyline, somehow, based maybe on Lion's Arch? More important and prominent things, of course, are the Deep Sea Dragon concept art attacking Lion's Arch. If they want to roll us into another Elder Dragon really quite suddenly and scary, you know, that attack may eventually end up happening in Season 3 or Season 4. And then we do have the addition of a wedding place, and we have an airbase. Marjorie and Casimir really didn't do very much in the expansion. One of the very last lines of dialogue you get, optional, if you know to go and find it after the final instance by headed back up, you can speak to Marjorie, tell her that she's been uncharacteristically quiet, and query that, and she says she's just got a lot on her mind. This perhaps could be, oh, I saw Rare die, and I don't want to lose Casimir without showing her how much I truly love her. Let's get married. And then they have a marriage somewhere in Lion's Arch. This is something I could absolutely see happening. Then, of course, the Airbase 2 may have some use. I mean, why would they put it there if it wasn't going to have anything cool going on? So, really, that's the main stuff. But here's the big question, of course. We've got 2 seasons of the Living World, then another expansion. Presumably, the next expansion is going to be 2 things. It's going to be race-centric, and it's going to be dealing with an Elder Dragon. Either of those speculations could be off, for what it's worth, but I think they're fairly safe ones to make. So, what race are we looking at? What Elder Dragon are we looking at? And then, of course, how does Season 3 and 4 segue into that? Well, I think the 2 main Elder Dragons we could have are Kralkatorrik and Primordus. Kralkatorrik, we've got a few things. We've got heavy involvement with Destiny's Edge. There's like a lot of emotion there. Ritlock even mentions that he desperately wants to kill Kralkatorrik. These weird changes with Destiny's Edge right now could spur some involvement with going after Kralkatorrik. As well as that, though, we've also got Morgemoth being the Elder Dragon of Mind, and we basically used the same tactic to kill Morgemoth that Destiny's Edge tried by pushing ourselves into the mind of an Elder Dragon. So there is this stuff with Snaf. There are even theories that Snaf may still be alive in there somehow, and this person who gave the egg to the Master of Peace oh so long ago that we saw the hint at in Season 2 maybe had something to do with Snaf as well. If we're learning more about Glint's legacy, then going to the Crystal Desert where she once resided is a smart thing to do. And from Kralkatorrik's perspective, if ArenaNet want to make Kralkatorrik active and scary to us, well, they've got that handed to them on a platter, don't they? We have Glint's offspring, which we're raising to fight him. If he got word of that, surely he'd be pretty pissed and come attack Tarir or something, no? I mean, didn't he basically go mental when he originally woke up and charged Glint herself? Why wouldn't he try and do that again? Not to mention the juicy big infusion of magic he just got. I think that's quite likely. Though, for what it's worth, I don't think Tarir could ever fall, because that would change the meta event of that map too much. The other Elder Dragon I just mentioned was Primordus. This is based on many of the same stuff from before Heart of Thorns, such as the Maguma Wastes being so nearby, and perhaps Primordus having caused the desertification of this region of the world, while Morgemoth was causing the overgrowth of this region. But as well, we do have that line with the Ratanovans and how they particularly hated Primordus, and maybe they'd done more research on him. Again, it's a pretty easy segue. The problem with the dragons, though, is it could be any of them. It could be the Deep Sea Dragon with Lion's Arch. It could just as well be Jormag. It's whichever one ArenaNet decides, oh, let's start making them move around and do things. And that's a pretty sad state of affairs, but it's the state we're in. As for race-centric, Though Ratasum had basically nothing going on this expansion, Ratanovus, Zin, the amount of golem stuff that's here, the uncategorized fractal, the proximity to current events, maybe we're going to see a lot of Asuran-based stuff. But my particular favorite is the idea of the chart, is the idea of learning more about Ritlock, and basically seeing a Kralkatoric-centered expansion with the char. But that's more just what I want to see, rather than what I can predict we'll see. But there you go, guys. That's what I have to say about the future of the story so far. That's what I think they're setting up. Bit of a sum up for you all. If you've been wondering what's on my mind, let me know what you guys think. Is this the kind of stuff you were hoping for? And specifically, did I miss any big plot threads that you think are going to be addressed? I'd love to hear in the comments. Let's have some good discussion. As always, you're all pretty awesome for that. And I'll see you next time.